It all started on a Wednesday night when I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing with thoughts I couldn't quite pin down: work stress, family drama, the vague feeling that I wasn't doing enough with my life. It was one of those nights where staying in bed felt suffocating, so I grabbed my car keys and decided to go for a drive. No destination, no plan, just the open road and a chance to clear my head. I live in a small town, so late night drives usually mean deserted streets and the occasional deer crossing the road. It's peaceful, in a way, but also eerily isolating. That night, I ended up taking a route I hadn't driven in years, a winding, two-lane road that led out toward the countryside. As I drove, memories began to surface, unbidden but relentless. This was the road my best friend, Caleb, and I used to take when we were teenagers. We'd drive for hours, windows down, blasting music and talking about everything and nothing. Caleb had been my closest friend, the kind of person you could sit in comfortable silence with, knowing they understood you without needing words. But we hadn't spoken in over 5 years. The fallout had been messy. It started with a stupid argument, something about money, or maybe a girl, I don't even remember anymore. But it escalated, as things tend to do when pride gets in the way. Harsh words were exchanged, bridges were burned, and before I knew it, we were strangers. I told myself I didn't care, that some friendships just weren't meant to last. But the truth was, I missed him. I missed us. I didn't consciously decide to drive to Caleb's place, but somehow, that's where I ended up. His family's old farmhouse was at the end of the road, tucked away behind a grove of oak trees. The house was dark, save for a single light on the porch. I sat in my car for what felt like forever, debating whether to knock or just turn around and leave. What was I even doing here? What would I say if he answered? Before I could make up my mind, the porch light flickered off. It felt like a sign, though I couldn't tell if it was telling me to leave or to stay. Against my better judgment, I got out of the car and walked up to the door. I knocked twice, then waited, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he'd hear it through the door. When the door opened, it wasn't Caleb who stood there. It was his younger sister, Emma. She looked at me with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "Luke," she said, her voice laced with confusion. "What are you doing here?" I stammered, caught off guard. I was just driving and thought I'd stop by." "Is Caleb home?" Her expression shifted, and I could tell something was wrong. "He's not here," she said, her tone guarded. "He moved to the city a couple of years ago." "Oh." I didn't know what else to say. "Do you know how I can reach him?" MIA hesitated, then stepped aside. "You'd better come in." The house hadn't changed much since the last time I'd been there. The same worn furniture, the same faint smell of wood smoke and lavender. But the atmosphere felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were holding onto something unspoken. MIA gestured for me to sit in the living room while she made tea. When she returned, she sat across from me, her hands wrapped around her mug like it was a lifeline. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said finally. "After everything that happened." I looked down at my own mug, suddenly feeling like an intruder. "Yeah, I guess it's been a while." There was a long pause before she spoke again. "Caleb's not in a good place, Luke. He's been struggling. A lot." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't know what I'd been expecting, but it wasn't this. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then told me everything. How Caleb had spiraled after our falling out, losing himself in alcohol and bad decisions. How he'd tried to rebuild his life but kept slipping back into old patterns. How he'd moved to the city for a fresh start but hadn't been in touch with the family for months. "I think he's ashamed," MIA said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He doesn't want us to see him like this." Guilt washed over me, sharp and unrelenting. I told myself I wasn't responsible for what happened to Caleb after we stopped talking, but hearing Mia's words made me question everything. Maybe if I'd reached out sooner, things would have been different. Maybe if I hadn't let my pride get in the way, he wouldn't have felt so alone. I left the farmhouse that night with Mia's number and a promise to call her if I managed to get in touch with Caleb. The drive home was a blur, my mind racing with thoughts of what I could say to him, how I could fix this. But when I got home, I realized I didn't even know where to start. It took me 2 weeks to work up the courage to call Caleb. When he answered, his voice was hoarse and unfamiliar, but there was a flicker of recognition when I said my name. "Luke," he said, and I could hear the hesitation in his voice. "I didn't think I'd ever hear from you again." "Yeah, well, I guess I didn't either," I admitted. "But I've been thinking about you. About us. And I want to make things right, if you'll let me." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, and I braced myself for the worst. But then Caleb sighed, and I could hear the faintest hint of a smile in his voice. "Yeah," he said. "I think I'd like that." It wasn't a perfect resolution. We didn't magically go back to being best friends overnight. But it was a start, and sometimes, that's all you need. Second story. It was the summer after I graduated college, a period that felt more like a foggy limbo than the start of the rest of my life. I had moved back to my hometown, a sleepy little place in the Midwest, to save money while figuring out my next step. My parents were kind enough to let me stay in my childhood bedroom, but the nostalgia was suffocating. One Friday evening, desperate for something to break the monotony, I decided to drive out to the state park a few miles away. It was a place I used to frequent during high school, especially on nights when I needed to clear my head. Equipped with my backpack, a journal, and a thermos of coffee, I planned to spend a few hours near the lake before heading back home. The park was as quiet as I remembered. The air was crisp, the stars vivid, and the lake mirrored the sky with an eerie stillness. I found a spot on a wooden bench near the water's edge and lost myself in my thoughts, writing sporadically in my journal. I don't know how long I sat there, but when I checked my watch, it was past midnight. Shivering from the sudden drop in temperature, I decided to pack up and leave. But as I reached the parking lot, a wave of panic washed over me. I couldn't find my backpack. I retraced my steps, checking the bench, the path, and even the underbrush nearby, but it was nowhere to be seen. My heart sank. The backpack contained my journal, my wallet, and my laptop, essentially everything important to me at the time. Just as I was about to give up and report it as lost, I noticed a faint light flickering in the distance, near a picnic pavilion I hadn't passed earlier. Intrigued and desperate, I made my way over, my phone's flashlight guiding the way. The pavilion was dimly lit by an old lantern, and sitting at one of the tables was a man who looked to be in his late 30s. He was dressed in worn jeans and a plaid shirt, with a scruffy beard that gave him a rugged appearance. To my surprise, my backpack was on the table in front of him. "Is this yours?" he asked, looking up as I approached. His voice was calm but carried a hint of curiosity. "Yes," I blurted out, relief flooding my voice. "I've been looking everywhere for it." "Where did you find it?" "Near the bench by the lake," he said, gesturing toward the water. "Thought someone might come back for it, so I waited." I thanked him profusely and reached for the bag, but he held up a hand. "Before you take it, can I ask you something?" I hesitated, caught off guard. Sure. "Why were you out here so late?" It wasn't the question I expected, but something about his demeanor made me answer honestly. I told him about my post-graduation aimlessness, my restless nights, and how the park was a place I came to think and escape. He nodded thoughtfully. "I get it. This place has a way of pulling you in when you're lost." We ended up talking for nearly an hour. His name was Sam, and he lived in a cabin on the outskirts of town. He had moved there a few years ago after leaving a corporate job in the city. According to him, the fast-paced life wasn't for him anymore, and he found peace in solitude and simplicity. Our conversation shifted from our personal stories to broader topics: life's unpredictability, the importance of community, and the small acts of kindness that often go unnoticed. "You know," he said, "people think they need grand gestures to make a difference. But sometimes, just waiting with a lost backpack can change someone's day, or even their life." His words stuck with me. By the time I left, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky with hues of pink and orange. I thanked him again, and he simply nodded, a quiet smile on his face. The encounter could have ended there, but it didn't. Over the next few weeks, I found myself thinking about Sam and our conversation. On a whim, I decided to visit the community center in town, something I hadn't done in years. Volunteering there became a turning point for me. I helped organize food drives, taught basic computer skills to seniors, and even started a small writing workshop for kids. The connections I made and the stories I heard reignited a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. One day, while distributing supplies at the center, I spotted Sam in the crowd. He was unloading boxes of donated goods from his truck, blending in with the other volunteers. I approached him, and he greeted me with the same calm demeanor. "You never mentioned you volunteered here," I said. He shrugged. "Didn't think it mattered. The work speaks for itself." It was true. Sam's quiet acts of kindness reminded me that change doesn't always come in sweeping gestures. Sometimes, it's the little things, the moments of connection, the time spent listening, and the willingness to show up that leave the most lasting impact. Looking back, that lost backpack wasn't just a mishap. It was the beginning of a journey that reshaped how I saw the world and my place in it. Sam's words and actions reminded me of the power of community and the importance of simply being there for others. Even now, years later, I carry those lessons with me. And every time I see a stranger in need, I think of that late-night encounter and how it changed my life. Third story. It all started with a text message. Not a dramatic one, mind you, no "I'm on my way," or "call me ASAP." Just a simple, "Hey, do you still want me to pick up the blue plates from your mom's house?" I stared at my phone, squinting at the unfamiliar number. The sender had clearly mistaken me for someone else, but instead of ignoring it, I replied, "I think you have the wrong number. But I'm curious, what's so special about these blue plates?" A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. "Oops, sorry about that. They're just plates my grandma used to own. They mean a lot to my sister, and I promised to grab them. Sorry to bother you." I smiled at the unexpected politeness. "No bother. Hope your sister gets her plates." And that should have been the end of it. But 2 days later, another message from the same number popped up. "Sorry to bug you again, but you seem like a chill person. Any chance you know where to get a good cup of coffee around here?" This time, I was intrigued. It wasn't every day that a random stranger asked for coffee recommendations. I figured, why not? Try Brewers on Main Street. Best cappuccinos in town. What followed was a bizarre series of text exchanges that eventually led to an offer I wasn't entirely sure I should accept. The stranger, whose name turned out to be Ellie, was new in town and suggested we meet up at Brewers. I was skeptical. Who randomly meets someone from a wrong number text? But then again, my life had been painfully uneventful since moving back to this city after college. I decided to take a chance. When I walked into Brewers, I immediately spotted Ellie. She was sitting at a corner table, waving awkwardly at me with a sheepish smile. She was younger than I expected, maybe in her mid-20s, with short auburn hair and a denim jacket covered in enamel pins. "Hi. Thanks for not thinking I'm a total weirdo," she said as I sat down. "No promises yet," I joked, and we both laughed. The conversation started as awkwardly as you'd expect. We talked about how she'd accidentally texted me instead of her sister's roommate, how she'd recently moved here for a job in graphic design, and how she didn't know anyone in the city yet. I told her about my post-grad struggles, my failed attempt at starting a career in film, and my current gig as a part-time barista. What surprised me was how easy it became to talk to her. Within an hour, it felt like we'd known each other for years. Things could have ended there, but Ellie had a knack for pulling me into the unexpected. A week later, she texted me out of the blue, "Want to crash a wedding with me?" Long story, but I need a plus one. Free food. It turned out she was invited to her boss's niece's wedding, but didn't want to go alone. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The wedding was every bit as chaotic as you'd imagine. Ellie accidentally spilled wine on the bride's dress, mistook the groom's cousin for a waiter, and somehow got us roped into a conga line. But amidst the chaos, I realized how much I enjoyed her company. After that, Ellie and I became inseparable. We explored the city together, tried new restaurants, and even started a small project designing quirky postcards with her artwork and my captions. But as our friendship grew, so did the complications. One day, I noticed Ellie growing distant. Our once daily texts turned into sporadic replies, and she started canceling plans. When I finally confronted her, she admitted she was struggling with anxiety and felt overwhelmed by the changes in her life. "I didn't mean to push you away," she said, tears welling in her eyes. "I just didn't want to drag you into my mess." Her vulnerability caught me off guard. I reassured her that I wasn't going anywhere and that she didn't have to face everything alone. Over the next few months, our friendship deepened in ways I didn't expect. We supported each other through job rejections, family drama, and countless existential crises. Ellie encouraged me to apply for a creative writing program I'd been too scared to consider, and I pushed her to share her artwork at a local gallery. We weren't perfect, though. We argued over silly things, like her tendency to double text or my habit of canceling plans last minute. But those disagreements only made our bond stronger. Looking back, it's wild to think about how much my life changed because of one wrong text. Ellie wasn't just a random stranger who entered my life, she became one of my closest friends and someone who helped me rediscover parts of myself I'd forgotten. Sometimes, the best things in life happen by accident. And sometimes, all it takes is a misdirected text message to remind you that the world is full of unexpected connections waiting to be made.